A worthy successor to Budokai 3, a colorful adventure that offered elements no game had ventured to include before, a polished combat system with solid foundations. That's the game we will talk about today. Welcome to the last chapter of the Budokai saga. This is Dragon Ball Z Infinite World. The day has finally arrived in which we will talk about this game, a jewel that surprisingly is not very remembered today. For this special chapter culminating with the series, we will set ourselves a tremendous objective, a goal of 100 likes. You ready? Let's go! This game only needs 2 minutes to show you in a subtle and fluid way in its new story mode several very attractive elements to engage you, a beginning that screams loudly that this will be one of the most ambitious Dragon Ball games. The board inspired from Budokai 2, but now with more elements, very well polished cinematics, an improved combat system from previous games, and an entire system based on the entertaining minigames to enrich the story. For its great majority, it would be a path system based on going across areas and collecting objects, going through obstacles and everything against the clock. You can use resources like Dragon Radar to orient yourself and know where your objectives are. All this is a combination that gave birth to a game that had everything to be one of the greatest but resulted in receiving a much lower recognition than it should have had. It's sad to think that the great majority of the masses tend to just remember Budokai 3 or Budokai Tenkaichi 3 respectively as the peak of the Dragon Ball games. Therefore, now I feel in the obligation to show you and highlight all the good that this game gave us and many times we did not know how to appreciate. This game is characterized by its minigames and the fidelity that it keeps with respect to the manga. It has a huge love for the events of the story beyond the fights, and more importantly, it doesn't make the same mistakes as games like Ultimate Ninja Heroes 2 for PSP, where it overuses these minigames in an exaggerated way and ends up by removing the value they represent. That doesn't happen here, and each new part of the story feels unique. As soon as you start the game, it leaves you on a very simple mission of going through a few hoops distributed around the stage, giving you the opportunity to get familiarized and prepare yourself for what this experience is going to be. This happens right at the beginning of the story where we go after Raditz to save Gohan. After completing each fragment of the game, we are thrown on this map very inspired by the navigation mechanics of Budokai 2, but where you will only control Goku, and in each scenario there will be a different version of Bulma to guide you on each board. You navigate either to the objectives of the main story or to different destinations to unlock extra things, some tutorials, additional items. In summary accounts, the game explores your curiosity when you decide to adventure to visit other points of interest on the board besides the main points. When we progress through these events, the cinematics presented at first a game engine that reflected the maximum potential of PS2. Remember that this game arrived in November 2008, so the advances were already more than notorious compared to its beginnings. The facial expressions, movements and camera angles were very faithful to the manga tomes, something that is worth appreciating. None was a copy-paste of the previous. Each time we faced something new challenges, different mechanics, and great effort on the part of the pace of the game to keep you engaged with the narrative, which is hard to do when you already know this Dragon Ball story inside and backwards. The level of a snake pet is a half-fulfilled dream. For a long time I had been waiting for a Dragon Ball game to dare to develop a level focused on displays. It was one of those that generated me the most intrigue, and Infinite World was the one that gave me the opportunity to walk this path with Goku. However, I say that it is a half-fulfilled dream due to the final objective of the level. It is only a minigame where you cover a determined distance, collecting coins and being careful not to fall to waste time. I would have liked it to have a more elaborated background, to have enemies, obstacles to dodge, that the speed of the travel was greater, something of that nature. However, I guess that being one of the many minigames included, I cannot complain. But if we want to talk about challenges, this title knows how to take this to the limit. After finishing the Path of the Snake and finding King Kai, they embark us in the task of catching Bubbles, just as it happened in the series. A detail that I love, by the way. The chase with Bubbles is complicated at the beginning, then it is a matter of coordination to catch him, which gives a sense of progress just as Goku does when he gets used to the gravity of King Kai's planet in the series. He feels the same way with the blocks you destroy with the key blasts. So the story progresses. We complete the training, we come back to life and face the Saiyans. After Vegeta's execution of Nappa, if I must say, I was a little disappointed that the fight with Vegeta was just a single fight and did not have any new gameplay or design different level. It had a 10 out of 10 cinematics. Later, at the beginning of the Frieza saga, we are given the opportunity to try another minigame for Goku's training on the road to Namek, a series of commands that we must press in the lessest time possible. And at this point you will be wondering if it will be so with all the special interactions in the story. The funny thing is that yes, but the game is not going to release all of them at first. It turns out that the several minigames and additional missions are not displayed at the first time if you focus on completing all the main missions at the first instance. This remains on standby so that later on you have a rewarded replayability option. You can go back to the levels of the game that you already passed through in search of those missions and minigames that you have to experience, and if you ask me, that is one of the most satisfying ways to replay a title you have been enjoying. By the way, the soundtrack seems very well chosen to me and goes according to each situation. Melodies that are many times easily forgotten by the mythical OST of Budokai 3, for example, but it is pretty good. We are going to put a pause here and I would like to explore the difficulty theme in this game further. I open parenthesis is quite high. If you came to see the review of the first Budokai, you will remember that I mentioned that this had been the most complicated game of all to date, right? Well, it turns out that that statement is still correct, but we're only talking about its mechanics. The Budokai 1 had a system of combos and linkage of hits that required a lot of practice and execution of many commands at the same time to achieve long-lasting attacks and damage than if they could be done in a much more simple way in Budokai 3, for example. But as regards the AI, the difficulty implemented in the Infinite World CPU is infinitely higher. In the great most of the fights from the Cell Saga, the fights could get chaotic, enemies guessing your moves, countering your game plan, not letting you finish any combo, dealing a tremendous amount of damage to you. It actually became very frustrating. This gets to the point that the game gives you the option to set the difficulty before each mission, where you can supposedly set it to very easy, but it turns out to be a hell to complete. Leaving this aspect aside, the story mode of Infinite World is full of the most iconic moments we could imagine, such as Goku's transformation into Super Saiyan for the first time, the final transformation of Gohan's fight against Cell, Goku's fight with Majin Vegeta, events of the GT Saga even, all with a great execution of the cinematics in combination with varied minigames that made you want to stop and say, hey, I saw that in the series. And I'm very glad that someone has taken the bother to include these little things in an official Dragon Ball game, and if it was the Dim's guys, I'm more than satisfied. If we want to talk about the gameplay, changes to the combat system and others, I have a couple of things to say. Some good, others not so good, but here we go. The fights feel longer, as if each attack does less damage than in previous games. That a fight feels longer is not something I'm going to complain about, but it is true that when you face this CPU and the fight goes on for more than 7 or 8 minutes in consequence, you are already beginning to tell how much your hands can hurt. There are very simple fighting games, but this is not the case, and the combination you must make really wear you out. With the stages in each fight, all have their unique destruction animations. The skills could be configured in the main menu of the story mode or in the personalization section to give each fighter the techniques and powers that you prefer. The aura is a returning item from Budokai 3, which was implemented with several defects. First, this aura can be activated at the time you want. It has no use limit, and second, the more hits you get while you are in this state, the longer the aura will last, since its duration is measured by the amount of ki that you have. It means that in many situations this mechanic can be abused by playing aggressively, a state where you do not receive any type of stamper or stunt from the rival's hits, and you can prolong the advantage proportionally to the number of hits you land, something that may lose a lot of balance in this combat system. You can say like to worry about balancing a PlayStation 2 game, but let's keep in mind that it was already 2008. Multiplayer games and online online fighting were already taking a pretty strong consolidation in the console market. Many have to come to consider the Budokai as the grandparents of Dragon Ball FighterZ, and it is not for less. Its combat mechanics are worthy of a first-class fighting game, where skill and practice are awarded. Imagine nothing more than a mechanic like the aura of this infinite world, where, in the FighterZ, it would be something that would break the entire system. Going to another change in the gameplay, the key release mechanic was included, which had been used in the Shin Budokai as a mobility plus when playing. This boosted your speed and the force with which you attack against the rival. Elements of Shin Budokai like this gave a lot of game freedom to the experience and full of innovation to this title. Those that did not return were attacks in chase with the minigame of chance, the Dragon Rush, which I thank a lot, and at this point I don't think I have to explain because it seemed to me a mechanic a little out of place for this game. This title had 42 characters. Some like Zarbon, Dodoria or Kid Goku did not appear, but to compensate it, some like Pan, Baby Vegeta and up to Super 17 will be added. The great variety of costumes, skins and colors continue to be present, fusions and transformations also around here. Infinite World has nothing to envy Budokai 3 in diversity. As I told you, this is an extremely nourished Dragon Ball game in the subject of lore, perhaps the best on its style. A large amount of game modes in the form of minigames that bring more life to the last installment of the Budokai saga on PlayStation 2. Training with Gohan in the time chamber, holding Cell with TN attacks, finishing Piccolo in a burst of Ki Blast. All this, as minimal as it may seem, it is a legacy that stays high for this generation of consoles, and sadly not as remembered as others of the genre. It may not have had the deserved recognition, but in my personal opinion, it has been one of the most complete Dragon Ball games I've had the fortune to play. Guys, tell me in the comments if you agree with me. If maybe I'm forgetting something to mention, leave it below and I will be glad to read it. I would like to thank each and every one of you for supporting this review series, and don't worry because iconic games like Dragon Ball Sagas, Burst Limit, Raging Blast, we are all going to bring them to the channel, so don't take off. Thank you so much for watching, that was all for today, take care and see ya.